have to excuse my cough. Brother Wayne just gave it to me, and so I'm struggling because he tried to shake my hand knowing he was sick. Let me just get some water. So. If you have your Bible, turn to 2 Samuel chapter number 1. 2 Samuel chapter number 1. We'll be doing something a little different this morning than what we have been. And we will start reading in verse number 17. Verse 17, it says, "And David lamented with this lamentation over Saul and over Jonathan his son. Also he bade them teach the children of Judah the use of the bow. Behold, it is written in the book of Jasher, the beauty of Israel is slain upon thy high places. How are the mighty fallen? Tell it not in Gath, publish it not in the streets of Askelon. Lest the daughters of the Philistines rejoice, lest the daughters of the uncircumcised triumph. Ye mountains of Gilboa, let there be no dew, neither let there be rain upon you, nor fields of offerings, for there the shield of the mighty is vilely cast away. The shield of Saul, as though he had not been anointed with oil. From the blood of the slain, from the fat of the mighty, the bow of Jonathan turned not back, and the sword of Saul returned not empty. Saul and Jonathan were lovely and pleasant in their lives, and in their death they were not divided. They were swifter than eagles, they were stronger than lions. Ye daughters of Israel, weep over Saul, who clothed you in scarlet with other delights, who put on ornaments of gold upon your apparel. How are the mighty fallen in the midst of the battle? O Jonathan, thou wast slain in thine high place. I am distressed for thee, my brother Jonathan. Very pleasant hast thou been unto me. Thy love to me was wonderful, passing the love of women. How are the mighty fallen, and the weapons of war perished? And so this morning, what I want us to look at, and I read it 3 times. I believe it's in verse number 19, verse 25, and verse 27. It says, how are the mighty fallen? And so in this passage, again, just background, which most of y'all have been in church long enough to know, you know and understand the background, but we're going to go over it anyway. So we know that Saul has been slain. Saul and Jonathan were slain at the end of 1 Samuel. They went up against the Philistines, and we know that for a long time, David had been anointed king. God had already told Saul that he was going to take his kingdom from him and give it to, and he's going to give it to David, and David has already been anointed king by Samuel. But David doesn't immediately take the throne. He doesn't immediately take the throne, and it's very interesting to me because you think, like, at least I would think, like, if I were going to be like, let's say, the branch manager, which none of the guys are in here, if I was going to be the branch manager of Kaiser, it's one thing to know you are, but whenever God has already said, hey, we're taking your kingdom from you, it'd be another thing to be like, hey, why is he still king? Why is he still king? But David doesn't go that route. David continues to serve under Saul. If you remember, whenever Saul was offering one of his daughters to David, David's like, y'all don't understand, and I'm paraphrasing here, he's like, y'all don't understand, it's a serious thing to be the son-in-law to the king. And David had a ton of respect for Saul. And even through all the terrible things that Saul did to persecute David, here we get to this chapter and understand that David and Saul had made their peace. They had made their peace, but yet David still went to the Philistines, and he still hung out with the Philistines. And then when it came time for the Philistines to go to battle with Israel, the Philistines said, no, sorry, David, you're not going with us. And so David was off fighting the Amalekites when Saul and Jonathan were fighting the Philistines. But yet here Saul and Jonathan are slain. And here is David, and David laments them. And so, again, like I said, if you think about all the terrible things that not Jonathan, but Saul had done to David, David brings up none of those. He brings up none of those as he is lamenting him. And so he's pouring out from his heart. In the previous verses, you have the Amalekite that shows up and tells David that Saul and Jonathan have been slain, and he explains to him how it happened and how Saul was wounded, and Saul asked him to run him through, and he did it, and then, so David actually has the Amalekite killed, and he talks about, he said basically, it's your own fault. He said in verse 14 that David said unto him, how wast thou not afraid to stretch forth thine hand to destroy the Lord's anointed? And so he tells him in 16, he said, David said unto him, thy blood be upon thy head, for thy mouth hath testified against thee, saying, I have slain the Lord's anointed. So David never lost the fact that Saul was the Lord's anointed. And so when you get to this passage right here, here is David, and he's mourning and he's lamenting the loss of Saul, and he's mourning and lamenting the loss of Jonathan. And he says in verse number 20, and I'm gonna change gears here in a second. So just whenever I do it, scratch your head if you want to, like Brother Jamie does. But understand that I'm gonna do it. But anyway, here he says in verse number 20, he says, "Tell it not in Gath. Tell it not in Gath." And so here is David, and he's like, the Philistines are over there, and they're celebrating the fall of the Lord's anointed. They're celebrating the fall of the Lord's anointed. Saul was, Israel was God's chosen people, and God chose Saul. Whether we like what Saul did or not, and obviously God didn't even like what Saul did because he took his kingdom away from him. But you understand, it was God that chose Saul. And if you remember, even when David committed adultery with Bathsheba, and then he had Uriah killed, one of his biggest punishments was because the lost people, uncircumcised people, whatever you want to call them, they were going to hear about it, and they were going to have a cause to mock God because of what David had done. And so here's David, and he's lamenting the fact that in the Philistine camp right now, the daughters of the Philistine are basically dancing in the street and rejoicing because of the death of Saul and Jonathan. And so my thought this morning, I'm changing gears right here for you. My thought this morning is about how are the mighty fallen. And we live in a day and age, and we live in a day and age where, Frankie, there are people that we've looked up to, that we've gone to church with, that we've been friends with, that we have followed, and Brother Wayne, they've fallen. And some of, I'm not talking about the ones that have grown old and passed away, but I'm talking about the ones who aren't serving God anymore. The ones who have, let's say they preached at the camp. They've preached at the camp. Y'all know my testimony. And the man that was preaching when I got saved in July 4th, 1992, the man that was preaching when I got saved, Brother Tyrone, I wouldn't walk across the street to hear him preach right now. I wouldn't walk across the street to hear him preach. But I don't celebrate that fact. I don't celebrate that fact. I mourn that fact. Here is David. And David has been, as far as we know, Jonathan never did David wrong. But Saul did David wrong continually. Saul tried to personally take David's life. And when he wasn't personally trying to take his life, he had armies chasing David all over the countryside, trying to take David's life. And yet here is David, and David hears of the death of Saul and the death of Jonathan. And instead of celebrating the fact that, hey, I'm now going to be king. There's nothing blocking my path now. There's nothing in my way. There's nothing holding me back from being king. Instead of celebrating that fact, he took a moment to mourn the loss of the Lord's anointed. And so it's just something that I've been thinking on as you move around in circles, whether it's at the camp or even the situation that come up recently here at the church. I'm sure there are some people that saw the photograph and they smiled and said, I knew it. They didn't know the story. They didn't know the background. They didn't know that it was trumped up charges. They didn't know any of that. But yet they hear about it and they see it and they're like, oh, what about this? Can you believe what we just saw? And we understand that was trumped up charges. But people for some reason, Chris, they celebrate the fact that the mighty are fallen. They celebrate the fact. And sometimes I hear people talking, and I want to be like Elisha whenever Elijah was going off the scene and the sons of the prophets kept coming to him. And that's in 2 Kings chapter number 2. I'll read it to you real quick. 2 Kings chapter number 2 and verse number 3. And the sons of the prophets that were at Bethel came forth to Elisha and said unto him, Knowest thou that the Lord will take away thy master from thy head today? And he said, Yea, I know it. Hold ye your peace. Verse number 5, and the sons of the prophets that were at Jericho came to Elisha and said unto him, Knowest thou that the Lord will take away thy master from thy head today? And he answered, Yea, I know it. Hold ye your peace. And that's when I read that about the tell it not in Gath, publish it not in the streets. Again, I understand you have to be made aware. You have to be made aware, but it just saddens me for the fact that people almost celebrate it, Brother Wayne. And I understand the world celebrates it. The world celebrates it. When someone, whether you've been a pastor, whether you've been a Sunday school teacher, whether you've been a full-time Christian worker, whatever that is, whether you've just been a church member, they're watching you. They're watching you, Frank, up there where you work. Paul, they're watching you. Dustin, they're watching you. If you say, hey, I'm a Christian, they're watching you. And they're watching you. And you work on your testimony, and you build your testimony. And every time something comes up, you have an opportunity to lose your testimony or to strengthen your testimony with these people. And so here we build that testimony, and they're looking for any little chink in that armor, any place where they can say, I thought you were a Christian. I thought you were a Christian. I can't believe that you said that. I can't believe that you did that. I can't believe that you went there. I can't believe that you watched that. I can't believe that you read that. I can't believe that you were looking at that. They're looking for those things. And we understand that that's the world, they're lost. But it bothers me that Christians almost celebrate when another Christian falls. And so here, not only that, but there's another thing to that. Is with David. David had a choice. He looked at Saul, and he looked up to Saul. And you say, why would he look up to Saul? I ask myself the same question. He looked up to Saul, and he could follow in Saul's footsteps, or he could follow God. Saul made a mistake. He made a mistake. And we understand that eventually David was going to make a mistake as well. But Saul made a mistake. But David followed after God. And so one of the other things that bothered me, and I guess that's the theme of this Sunday school lesson this morning, on how are the mighty fallen, is the fact that a lot of people will follow a fallen leader. A lot of people will follow a fallen leader. And if you have not built your foundation on Christ, if your foundation is built on something else, and I hope I make myself clear here as I say this, I believe that we should have a good relationship with our church, Frankie. I believe you should be a member of a local New Testament Baptist church. And I believe that you should have a good relationship with the people in your church. I believe that you should have a good relationship with the pastor of your local New Testament Baptist church. But I don't believe that that can be all of it. You have to have your own personal relationship with God. Because if you think about it, and I understand it's very rare to have a church that's as old as Concord Baptist Church is and have only had 2 pastors. That is a very rare thing. Most churches don't have that. Most churches have a pastor, he comes in, he's there for a little while, and then he's gone. He moves on, and he's gone. And so if you only come because of the pastor, if he leaves, whether he passes away, whether God moves him away, or whether he falls, what's going to happen to you when he leaves? What if the next guy doesn't have the same personality? Brother Randy has loads of personality. People love to hear him preach. He preaches all over the country. People love to hear him preach. What if the next guy, and I'm not saying immediately, you understand what I'm saying? You understand? 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, whatever it is. What if the next guy doesn't have the same personality? What if the next guy that pastors Concord Baptist Church is different? But he's still God's man. But your relationship was not to Christ. Your dedication was not to the church. Your dedication was simply to the pastor. And because your dedication was simply to the pastor, that's why you see people, sometimes, Frankie, they'll follow them around. They'll follow them around. They'll go from here to here to here to here to here. And they're never settled. He's a tumbleweed. He's a tumbleweed pastor. I mean, again, if you ride around like I do a lot, you'll see the same pastor's name. He was pastoring over here in Carbondale. Now he's pastoring up in Dalton. Now he's pastoring over in Chatsworth. Now he's pastoring over in Sugar Valley. And Frankie, I mean, it's only been 3 or 4 years. It's like, really, God really wanted you to just show up and pastor for 6 months to a year, and then move to another church? Is that really what God wanted you to do? But people follow men, and their relationship is built on the man and their relationship. And I'm not always blaming the pastor for that. I'm not saying that's the pastor's fault. But I want you to understand that people follow men, and when that man is gone, their whole connection to the church is gone. Their relationship with God is gone. Because they never established that relationship with God. And I'm going to say, it's not just the pastor. Again, if your friend brought you to church, if your friend invited you to church, and your friend is not here at church anymore, does that mean it's time for you to leave the church? It shouldn't be. But that's how it goes often. As a parent, I've brought my kids to church. But the goal is not just to have them sit in church. The goal, honestly, my kids sit in my Sunday school class. I have never told my kids, you have to sit in my Sunday school class. Not one time have I ever said, you need to be in here. Not to any one of them. But they choose to be in there, and I appreciate that fact. But if I fall tomorrow, You say, well, I mean, why would you think that? Paul said he feared lest he had preached to others and he became a castaway. If the Apostle Paul could fear the fact that he had preached to others and he could become a castaway, any one of us could fall. And so the goal as a parent is for our kids to have and establish their own relationship with Christ. Their own relationship with Christ, and have their own dedication to God, and have their own, I'm going to say, moral compass, have their own convictions, have their own dedication to God, have their own dedication to the Bible, have their own love for the church that they go to. Because if they don't, Brother Wayne, when they get 18, 19, 20, 21, whenever it is, and they're like, hey, I'm out of here. I'm out of here. Or if it was just because I was here and I fall, then it's almost like bowling. And you got one pin, and one pin, very rarely do you just knock one pin out. You take another one out, and another one out, and that one takes another one out, and that one takes another one out. So here David is lamenting the fact that the mighty are fallen, but David has a choice. He has a choice of he can follow in their footsteps. He can follow in Saul's footsteps and make a mess of things, or he can follow after God. And so you hear, sometimes you're around and they're talking and they're like, did you hear about preacher so-and-so? And Brother Wayne, I mourn the fact whenever I hear them say, did you hear about preacher so-and-so? I don't ever want to hear those words again. I don't ever want to hear those words. Don't thrill me. Those words don't make me happy. Those words don't make me say, well, and sometimes people are like, you see, I knew it. And maybe you did know it. But it's not time to celebrate. It's not time to celebrate. Here's David, and in the world's eyes, it should have been time for David to celebrate. Saul and Jonathan are gone. Israel's in a mess, and they need a king, and now's my opportunity to come in and be a king. But he wasn't celebrating. He was mourning the fact. And again, like I said, as we sit in here in Sunday school, which I don't think of myself highly at all. and so I don't think y'all are followers of me. But I do understand the fact that if I fell tomorrow, it would affect you. It would affect you, because in the 5 years that I've been doing this, hopefully, prayerfully, I've said something in those 5 years that has helped you grow, has helped you move along as a Christian, that has helped you. And you said, and sometimes you hear someone and you hear them preach and you hear them testify, and you're like, man, I wish I could be like that person. And then that person falls, and you're like, oh, man, how could they preach like they preached and have that in their heart? How could they testify like they testified and have that in their heart? How could they do those things? And honestly, you have to come to grips with the fact that God uses imperfect people. Christ is the only perfect man. He's the God man, but you understand, Christ was the only perfect man. And if you go through your Bible and you look, very rarely, Frankie, and Frankie, I'm sure if you studied it out, you'd probably find a couple people that the Bible doesn't show us the bad side. But you just start in Genesis, and God shows us that Abraham lied. You move over to Exodus, and we understand that Moses, as great as Moses was, that God said, Moses, you can't go into the promised land because you lost your temper. And you just work your way through. You get into Judges and you see Samson and you're like, God, how, an all-seeing, all-knowing God, how could you allow Samson to be who he was and yet he was a judge? And so you have to come to grips with the fact that God uses imperfect people. And when those imperfect people fail, that's not on God, that's on them. But it doesn't always change the fact that, hey, God was using them. The man that was preaching when I got saved, God used him. God used him at that time. Brother Sammy said, I want you to come up. It was a Thursday afternoon. It was time to go to dinner. Y'all understand, if y'all been in a meeting, especially if you've been in a meeting where you're there in the morning, in the afternoon, and at night, and it's time to go to dinner. And Brother Sammy said, I want you to come up. And that man followed God, Frankie. He followed God and said, open your Bible to Luke chapter number 16. And preached that message on Luke chapter 16, and I heard that message and responded to that message and got saved at that message on a Thursday afternoon at Faith Baptist Camp. God used that man, and he used him. But later, when that man fell, I was not following that man, I was following Christ. I was following Christ. And because I was following Christ, when that man fell, I could mourn the fact that he wasn't who he was anymore. I could mourn the fact that he was never going to be my favorite preacher. He was never going to be that again because of what he'd done. But I can still say that man followed God whenever he preached that day. And so David is lamenting the fact that the mighty are fallen. But because David had a relationship with God, because David had his own relationship with God, he didn't have to follow in those footsteps. And so what I want us to think about this morning is, again, if I ask anyone in here, from Brother Parks back there, to Brother Tyrone, to Luke, Luke's been all over the country. And Luke understands, my wife and her mom, they've been all over the country. And Chris, sometimes you go, when you're an evangelist like Brother Randy was, or my father-in-law was, you go into churches, and every time you go in, you look around and see, you look for the familiar faces, and you look to see who's missing. And I don't even ask. I don't even ask. But a lot of times someone will say, yeah, so-and-so, they're not here anymore. They're not here anymore. And then you look around, and you're like, well, wait a second. And then you hear the whole story, and when so-and-so left, so-and-so left. When this person left, that person left. There's another church that has been dealing with an issue, and it's an issue that shouldn't be an issue, but it's an issue. And they're dealing with repentance, and I think they had over 30 people get up and walk out at one time. And all that was working in the background, Chris. It was all working in the background. And I actually thought about doing a skit that we do at the church camp we go to. We do a skit, and I thought about doing a skit similar to Dominoes, and where just one falls and the next one falls and the next. And you watch a youth group sometimes. You watch a youth group, Jake, and there's one that's kind of holding things up. And if he goes this way, the whole youth group's going to go that way. But if he goes this way, the whole youth group's going to go that way. And sometimes, Chris, it just takes one. And the next thing you know, 3, 4, 5, 6, all go out with them. And like I said, you go to these churches and you walk in and you look, again, we were just up at church camp last week, and when you show up, you look and you're like, okay, who's still here and who's not? Who's still here and who's not? And there's a story, but the sadder part of the story, Frank, again, because I understand people are who they are, is not just that one left. It's the ones that follow. It's the ones that their relationship with Christ was not right. And they hadn't built their relationship with Christ. They built their relationship with that person. And their whole sole purpose of going to church was so they could hang out. And you see it with boys and girls. You see it, again, like I said, with kids and their parents. You see it, and that person leaves. And the next thing you know, that person leaves, and that person leaves, and that person leaves. And you're like, really? Was your relationship with Christ so shallow that person was the person that was holding you up? That was the person that was holding you up. That was your whole, you really never intended to be a Christian. You just wanted to follow that person. And so here's David, and Saul has died, and Jonathan has died, and three times he says the words, "How are the mighty fallen? How are the mighty fallen?" And sometimes, like I said, I don't want to say we rate people, but if the pastor falls, it's different than if the Sunday school teacher falls, and if the you understand what I'm saying. But sometimes great people in our minds, in our eyes, that have preached great messages fall and falter. And it doesn't change the fact of who God is. It doesn't change the fact of who Christ is. It changes none of that, Chris. It only changes the fact that they let the devil win. They let the devil win. And they let him have his way with them. And they no longer, they allowed their flesh to take it. Brother Randy was preaching on that a couple weeks ago, about your flesh and the spirit. And so here is David, and Jonathan, again, was his friend. And Saul, again, if you think about all the terrible things that Saul had done. He'd done some terrible things. Saul gives him a wife and then takes her away from him and gives her to someone else. I'm sorry, but I would have trouble forgiving that. I would have trouble forgiving that. Now, maybe if you had a bad wife, you're like, happy day, she's gone. But you understand what I'm saying? Here's David, and Saul gives Michal to be his wife, and then Saul says, you know what? No, I'm mad at David. You're not his wife anymore. You're going to be married to so-and-so. And Saul had done these terrible things, but yet David could still look at him and say, he was anointed of God. There was a time. Look at how he describes him. He said, Saul and Jonathan were lovely. I don't know, Frankie, if someone chased me all over the country, if someone tried to throw a javelin or a spear at me and tried to kill me on multiple occasions, if someone did those things and basically put a bounty out for me and caused me to run all over the country and have to hide in caves and go to the enemies of God, and when I'm over at the enemies of God, I have to feign myself as a madman. I have to feign like I'm a crazy man to escape from the enemies of God. If I'd had to done all those things, I don't know that I could call that person lovely. I don't know that I could do it. But David did. David at this moment was able to look back and say, I'm mourning the fact that Saul is not here anymore. And sometimes Sometimes when people leave, there's an anger that happens. There's a frustration. There's a disappointment. And sometimes disappointment comes out as anger. Brother Wayne, sometimes it comes out. And you mourn the fact that they're gone. But in the end, if you want to be right, you need to mourn the fact that they're gone. But you don't need to let bitterness rule the day. David could have been so bitter. He could have been so bitter. He could have been so bitter at Saul for the things that Saul had done. I mean, again, it cost David years of his life. Running around, hiding, and all the things that happened to him. He could have been so bitter. But instead of being bitter, he said, you know what, I'm not going to think about those things. I'm just going to remember the good times. I'm just going to remember the fact that he was God's anointed. I'm just going to remember the fact that we had some good times. And again, Saul is gone, Jonathan's gone. But if you think about it, the whole reason David did something good for Mephibosheth was for Jonathan's sake. He said, is there any left? Is there any left of the house of Saul? Is there any left? He said, I just want to do good for any that's left. And there's this crippled boy Mephibosheth. And you think about how Mephibosheth's life was changed because David didn't hold a grudge. It was the house of Saul. Yes, he was Jonathan's son, but it was the house of Saul that he wanted to do something good for. And so here, like I said, these things are going to happen. Mighty people in your life are going to fall. People that you are close to are going to fall. And you have a choice. You can follow them. You can mourn and pray for them. You can be bitter and angry and hateful. You have a choice. The choice is yours. Again, like I said, but the closer you walk with God, and the closer you are with God, and the more grounded you are in your faith, the less this is going to affect you. If you don't have that relationship, it's going to affect you greatly. It's going to affect you greatly. But the closer you are to God, the more you understand. I tell my wife and kids all the time. My wife's like, "Oh, how do you deal with that?" I'm like, "Because people are just people. They're fallen creatures, and they're fallen, and they're going to make mistakes. They're going to do me wrong. I'm going to do them wrong. I'm going to have a bad day, and I'm going to say something rude to Jake one day at work. It's not because I'm mad at Jake. I'm just having a bad day. Jake may be having a bad day, and he may say something rude to me. If it's bad enough, I'm going to say, Jake, chill out, man. Calm down. But you understand, like in a marriage, you got to learn to get over stuff. If you don't learn to get over stuff, if you just got a trash can and your trash can's always full because your husband's always throwing stuff in the trash can and you never empty it, you're always going to be mad at your husband. If you're the husband and your wife's always doing stuff she shouldn't do and you're always upset with her, you're always going to be upset. You just got to learn to get over stuff and not hold a grudge and be like, you know what, people, they're just people. They're just people, and they're flawed. And so here's David, and he was able to look at Saul and say, you know what, Saul? You were lovely. You know what, Saul? You were pleasant. And I know he said Saul and Jonathan, but you understand what I'm saying. He said, you were lovely. You were pleasant. He said, even in your death, you and your son, you were still close. And honestly, that's more on Jonathan than Saul, we understand. that Jonathan really struggled because Jonathan was happy that God anointed David to be king. But yet here's Jonathan, and all the way up to the last moment, he was still fighting his dad's battles for him. He was still fighting on his dad's side. He said, Saul, you were lovely, you were pleasant. He said, you were swifter than eagles. This is a man that threw a spear at him, Brother Parks. It's a man that on a couple occasions David had the opportunity to say, you know what, now's my chance. And that's what they told him. Like, here's your chance. God's put him right there in front of you so you can do something about it. And he goes and he cuts off his skirt. And it breaks his heart that he even just cut off his skirt. It broke his heart that he even did that. And when the mighty fall, it's not time to celebrate, it's time to mourn. It's time to lament. But it's not time to move away from God. It's not time to be like, well, I can't go to church anymore. How many people don't go to church anymore because someone doesn't go to church anymore? How many people don't go to church anymore because their pastor is not their pastor anymore? And what's the problem? The problem is your relationship with God. And so I think you should have a local church. I think you should have a good pastor. I think you should have a good relationship with all of those things. But you better establish your own relationship with God. Because you think about this. If you drive to Chattanooga, there was a powerhouse church in Chattanooga. And it's not there anymore, Brother Parks. It's humongous. The building was humongous. It seated probably close to 1,000 people. And it's empty. There was a college there, Highland Park Baptist Church. And there was a college there, and there was a great pastor there at one time. And that church is not even there anymore. But hopefully there are enough people there that were affected by Highland Park that they still have their relationship with God, and they may not be going there anymore, but they ought to be going somewhere. They ought to be under a pastor somewhere and worshiping somewhere. Because it's important that when you see mighty people fall in your life, instead of following, you learn to lean on Christ in those moments. Thank you.